Welcome back to Scrutiny. I'm Ralph Sigmund, and this is a special report on a major escalation in the high-stakes game of economic warfare playing out on the world's oceans.
Reporting live from Iceland, we have Susanna Miller.
Today, we're breaking down a dramatic and unprecedented event that has sent shockwaves through global energy markets and drawn furious condemnation from Moscow. The United States seizure of the Russian-flagged oil tanker, the Marinera. This is not just another headline. This is a bold, direct, and highly provocative act of state power that fundamentally changes the dynamics of how the West is enforcing its sanctions against both Russia and Venezuela. Over the next several minutes, we'll take you through the intricate details of this operation, the geopolitical forces that set the stage for it, and the potentially far-reaching consequences for international law, global trade, and the fragile balance of power at sea. Let's start at the beginning. On January 7, 2026, the Russian Ministry of Transport issued a stark announcement. U.S. naval forces had boarded and seized the Russian oil tanker Marinera in the North Atlantic Ocean. According to Moscow, this was a clear-cut case of a sovereign Russian-flagged vessel being taken by force on the high seas, an act they immediately decried as a violation of international maritime law. The Russian Transport Ministry went on to state a foundational principle of maritime sovereignty, asserting that no state has the right to use force against vessels duly registered in other states. So what exactly happened? The vessel in question, the Marinera, was not always a Russian ship. Just prior to its seizure, it had been operating under the name Bella 1 and had only recently been re-registered under the Russian flag. This is a critical detail. This quick change of registry is a well-known tactic in the world of sanctions evasion, a practice often referred to as flags of convenience, or in more extreme cases, as part of a shadow fleet. These are networks of aging tankers that obscure their true ownership and cargo to transport oil from sanctioned nations like Russia and Venezuela to buyers in Asia, effectively bypassing Western embargoes designed to cripple their economies. The United States, however, had been tracking this vessel for some time. American intelligence had identified the Marinera as being linked to Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA, which has been under stringent U.S. sanctions for years. The cargo it was believed to be carrying was Venezuelan crude, a direct violation of the U.S. ban on Venezuelan oil imports that was reinstated and strengthened in the latter part of 2025. The seizure, therefore, was not a random act of piracy, but a deliberate, targeted operation with a specific legal and strategic justification from the American perspective. This operation has been officially designated as part of a much larger, ongoing U.S. military and law enforcement campaign called Operation Southern Spear. While Operation Southern Spear was initially conceived as a counter-narcotics and counter-narco-terrorist initiative in the Western Hemisphere, its mandate has clearly been expanded to include the aggressive interdiction of sanctioned oil shipments. In fact, this is not the first time the U.S. has used its formidable military and Coast Guard assets for this purpose under this operation. Just a month earlier, on December 11, 2025, U.S. forces had supported a Coast Guard team in interdicting another sanctioned tanker. And since December 10th, the Coast Guard has already seized two other tankers, the Skipper and the Centuries, as part of this escalating campaign. The scale and ambition of Operation Southern Spear are truly staggering. According to official U.S. Southern Command documentation, the operation has evolved into a high-tech, hybrid maritime force. It now deploys unmanned air and surface vessels to help determine combinations of unmanned vehicles and manned forces to patrol vast stretches of ocean. Its goal is to create a naval quarantine on sanctioned oil tankers traveling in and out of Venezuela, effectively blockading the country's primary source of foreign revenue. This represents a significant militarization of economic sanctions, moving beyond financial penalties to active physical interdiction on the high seas. The seizure of the Marinera is the most audacious action of this campaign to date, for one simple reason. It was flying the Russian flag. Previous interdictions had largely targeted vessels from nations with less formidable military capabilities, or those already deeply entangled in illicit trade. Taking a ship that is officially registered to the Russian Federation, a nuclear-armed superpower with its own powerful navy, is a completely different order of magnitude. It is a direct challenge to Moscow's sovereignty and its ability to protect its commercial interests on the global stage. Reports indicate that the boarding operation was conducted by a combined U.S. Navy and Coast Guard team, possibly with support from Special Operations Forces, given the sensitivity and potential for armed resistance. The tanker was seized in the Atlantic near Iceland, a location far from U.S. traditional patrol zones and deep in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. This suggests a sophisticated long-range tracking and interdiction capability, where the U.S. was willing to project its enforcement power deep into international waters to make its point. From Washington's perspective, this was a necessary and justified act. A U.S. official described the Marinera as a runaway vessel, implying it was a known violator that had been flouting international sanctions with impunity. The official line is clear: America will not tolerate illicit activities that benefit Russia and its allies, directly linking the seizure to the broader strategic goal of weakening the Moscow-Beijing-Caracas axis that has been forming in opposition to the Western-led global order. By seizing the ship and its cargo, the U.S. not only disrupts a single illicit shipment, but also sends a powerful deterrent message to the entire shadow fleet network. No vessel, no matter its flag, is safe from U.S. enforcement if it is caught violating these sanctions. Furthermore, the legal justification hinges on the vessel's connection to Venezuela, not its registry. The U.S. argues that because the cargo was sanctioned Venezuelan oil, the shipment itself was illegal under U.S. law, and therefore the vessel carrying it is subject to forfeiture, regardless of its registry. This is a controversial interpretation of maritime law, which traditionally grants a vessel the legal protections of its flag state. However, in an era of complex global supply chains and deliberate obfuscation of ownership, the U.S. is taking a more aggressive stance, focusing on the ultimate beneficiary of the cargo rather than the paperwork of the ship. This brings us to the heart of the international legal dispute. Russia's condemnation is fierce and unambiguous. Moscow is framing this as a textbook case of piracy, a brazen act of state-sponsored theft on the high seas. International maritime law, primarily codified in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, grants a vessel on the high seas the exclusive jurisdiction of its flag state. Interdiction by a foreign naval power is generally only permissible in cases of piracy, slave trade, or with the explicit consent of the flag state. The U.S. claim of Venezuelan sanctions violation does not, in Russia's view, provide a legitimate legal basis for such an action against a Russian-flagged ship. They see it as a dangerous precedent that undermines the very foundation of global maritime order, a foundation that protects all nations' commercial shipping, not just their own. The potential for escalation here is immense. This incident sits at a dangerous intersection of economic warfare, great power competition, and maritime sovereignty. Russia has a powerful northern fleet based in the Kola Peninsula, just a short distance from where the Marinera was seized. While a direct military confrontation over a single tanker is unlikely, Moscow has a range of retaliatory options at its disposal. It could, for example, begin its own inspection regime of Western-flagged vessels, looking for any pretext to seize them in tit-for-tat actions. It could significantly increase diplomatic and economic pressure on any nation that supports or facilitates U.S. maritime interdiction efforts. Or it could simply accelerate its efforts to build a more robust and resilient shadow fleet of its own, using ice-class tankers for the Northern Sea route to completely bypass the Atlantic and its U.S. patrols. For global markets, the implications are equally significant. The seizure of the Marinera is a stark reminder of the fragility of the global oil supply chain. The shadow fleet has been a critical pressure valve, allowing Russian and Venezuelan oil to find buyers and preventing a complete collapse in their economies, which in turn has helped keep global oil prices from skyrocketing. If the U.S. campaign under Operation Southern Spear proves successful in dismantling this fleet, it could lead to a significant tightening of global oil supply. This would benefit U.S. and allied energy producers, but would be a severe shock to the global economy, particularly for nations in Asia that have become reliant on these discounted, sanctioned barrels. Moreover, this could accelerate the ongoing trend of de-dollarization and the fragmentation of the global economic system. Countries that fear becoming the next target of U.S. maritime enforcement may be driven to create alternative, non-Western financial and trade networks. They may move their commercial shipping to non-U.S. allied registries and use alternative insurance and payment mechanisms to create a parallel, sanctions-proof maritime.
Thank you for that crucial information, Susanna. We'll keep our viewers updated as the United States' actions continue to trigger geopolitical crises around the globe.